to Big Story. This is Jamima. Well, get into the details. As the 14th Dalai Lama celebrates his 19th birthday, the question of his successor has ignited global debate. The Dalai Lama, revered as the reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, is traditionally identified through spiritual signs and visions by senior Tibetan monks after his passing. But his sacred process now faces political interference, with China initiating the next Dalai Lama must be selected through the Golden Own method and approved by its government, a claim the current Dalai Lama has firmly rejected. He has declared that his reincarnation will be recognized solely by the India-based Gaden Podranga Trust, which he founded, and not by any external authority. India, home to the Tibetan government in exile, has reiterated its commitment to religion's freedom, maintaining a neutral stance of succession process. With spiritual tradition clashing against geopolitical interest, the future of Tibetan leadership remains a deeply sensitive and internationally watched issue.
The term Dalai Lama translates to ocean of wisdom, derived from the Mongolian word Dalai, meaning ocean, and the Tibetan word Lama, meaning spiritual teacher. The institution of the Dalai Lama dates back over 600 years and holds deep spiritual and cultural significance in Tibetan Buddhism. The current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, was born in 1935 in the village of Taksar in Tibet and was recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama in 1939. He has lived in exile in Dharamshala, India, since fleeing Tibet in 1959 and is now 90 years old. His advanced age has reignited global interest in the question of succession. While the Dalai Lama is a revered Buddhist figure, his influence extends far beyond religion. He is seen as a global symbol of peace and compassion. As such, the selection of his successor is not just a matter of Tibetan tradition but a decision with international implications, drawing attention from governments, religious communities, and human rights advocates. Dalai Lama enters his 90th year. He has made a landmark declaration that the centuries-old spiritual lineage will continue beyond his lifetime. Responding to appeals from millions of followers, he affirmed that his successor will be chosen according to Tibetan Buddhist tradition, with the Gaden Podranga Trust holding exclusive authority over the process. Rejecting China's claim to control the succession, the Dalai Lama emphasized that no external power has the right to interfere. He further advised that his reincarnation should be born outside China and urged followers to reject any candidate selected by Beijing. This announcement, made during his birthday celebrations in Dharamshala, marks a pivotal moment in the global discourse on faith, freedom, and the future of Tibetan leadership.
My name is Tenzin Sundu. I'm a Tibetan writer and activist based here in Dharamshala. Today, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama made a very important decision, and that decision had been declared today here in Dharamshala, just a little ahead of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday. His Holiness the Dalai Lama today said that there will be 15th Dalai Lama and that the institution of the Dalai Lama will continue. In the process of his written statement, and also that was broadcast in video, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said that for decades he has been consulting with the Tibetan people and people in the Himalayas who revered him so much, and also Indians all across the country who love and respect His Holiness, and then the followers of Tibetan Buddhism all across the world. His Holiness said that there have been repeated a number of appeals and pleading to His Holiness that he should continue to be reborn and serve the cause of Tibet, humanity, and world peace. So therefore, this important decision today is a path-breaking decision that had been declared today a little ahead of the 90th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In the written statement, it concluded by saying that this entire process of selecting the next Dalai Lama will be done by Gandhem Podang Trust, which is functioning directly under His Holiness, and he said that no other party would have any interest or would have any intervention in this, and only the Gandhem Podang has the sole authority in the decision making. Now, this decision is important for the Tibetan people. Firstly, we have always been expecting His Holiness the Dalai Lama to be reborn, but today it has come with the form of this declaration. Therefore, it is a great matter of celebration and great news for the Tibetan people.
The process of identifying the next Dalai Lama is deeply rooted in Tibetan Buddhist tradition and can take several years. When the current Dalai Lama passes away, senior monks begin their search by interpreting spiritual signs, including visions received during meditation at the sacred Lamo Latso lake. They also consider the direction in which the Dalai Lama's body was facing at the time of death and the path of the smoke from his cremation. Once a child is found who resembles the previous Dalai Lama, he is tested by presenting items that belonged to the former spiritual leader to see if he can recognize them. This was the case with the current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, who identified the 13 Dalai Lama's belongings at the age of 2. After selection, the child undergoes years of rigorous training in Buddhist philosophy and leadership. The Panchen Lama, another high-ranking spiritual figure, traditionally plays a key role in confirming the reincarnation. This sacred process blends faith, ritual, and symbolism and is central to preserving Tibetan spiritual heritage.
With deep reverence and boundless joy, I join millions around the world in wishing His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama a most happy and joyful 98th birthday. This is a celebration of a remarkable life dedicated to compassion, wisdom, and non-violence. Your Holiness, you are more than a spiritual leader. You are a living bridge between ancient wisdom and a modern world. For over 7 decades, you have carried the light of Buddha's teachings with humility and clarity, guiding not only followers of Tibetan Buddhism, but people of all faith and backgrounds towards a more compassionate and ethical way of life. In a world strife with conflict, your message embodied in how you continue to lead your life assume even greater and more urgent significance. It is a matter of pride and honor for India and
The Dalai Lama, the highest spiritual authority in Tibetan Buddhism, has reignited global discussion by announcing that the process to select his successor, the 15th Dalai Lama, is underway. He clarified that only the Gandhem Podang Trust, which he established, holds the exclusive right to advise a sacred tradition, firmly rejecting any external interference. However, China has responding with a strong opposition, insisting that it must approve the reincarnation, setting historical precedent through that Qing dynasty golden arm method. This controversy stems from China's border strategy as a assert influence over Tibetan affairs, both political and spiritual. Beijing views as a Dalai Lama as a separatist and fears that an independently chosen successor could undermine its control over Tibet. The Dalai Lama is a declaration that is reincarnation will be born outside of the China and that any candidate selected by Beijing should be rejected has further escalated tensions. India, which hosts the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile, has maintained that the decision rests solely with the spiritual leader and the traditions he upholds. The issues has now evolved beyond religious successions, becoming a flashpoint in the geopolitical of war between faith, autonomy, and state control.
The Dalai Lama has firmly rejected any role for China in the selection of his successor, declaring that only the guardian for Drang Trust established by him will oversee the process. Within hours of this announcement, China responded by insisting that its approval is mandatory for the reincarnation and that the selection must follow its national laws, including the use of golden method and conducting the process within Chinese territory. The Dalai Lama countered these claims, reiterating that his successor will be born outside China and urging followers to reject any candidate chosen by Beijing. China's attempts to influence the succession have long been viewed as part of its border strategy to assert control over Tibetan spiritual affairs. In contrast, countries like India have consistently respected Tibet's religious autonomy, affirming that the decision rests solely with the Dalai Lama and the tradition he upholds. Has long attempted to influence the selection of the next Dalai Lama as part of its border strategy to assert control over Tibet. Central to this effort is the Golden Own method, introduced by the Qiang dynasty in 1793, which involves placing the names of potential reincarnations into a golden vessel and drawing one by lot. While China claims this process ensures fairness and aligns with historical precedent, critics argue it is a political tool to install a compliant spiritual figure. Chinese officials insist that the reincarnation must be approved by the central government and conducted within China's borders. Citing national laws and religious regulations, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning recently reiterated that even though China upholds religious freedom, it has specific rules for managing the reincarnation of Tibetan lamas. The Dalai Lama, however, has firmly rejected Beijing's claims, declaring that only the guardian for Drang Trust has the authority to recognize his successor. He emphasized that his reincarnation will be born outside China and urged followers to reject any candidate selected by Beijing. This clash between spiritual tradition and state control has turned the Dalai Lama's succession into a geopolitical flashpoint, with global implications for religious freedom and Tibetan autonomy.
Now, right after His Holiness the Dalai Lama's declaration that there will be the 15th Dalai Lama and the institution of Dalai Lama will continue, the Chinese government started to respond adversely. They started to say, how can the Dalai Lama make that kind of decision? Chinese government suddenly felt insecure and they were making criticisms of His Holiness making this kind of decision from here. Now, the Chinese government, which was established in 1949 under the leadership of Mao Zedong, is only mere 75 years old. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the entire institution and the legacy is 400 years old tradition in the Tibetan community. We are talking about His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a Tibetan leadership, and it's nothing to do with China. Why is China so worked up when His Holiness the Dalai Lama is making that kind of decision here in India, in the free country of this country, and also having that kind of support all around the world? The Chinese government has nothing to do with this entire position of the Dalai Lama and also the tradition of the Tibetan reincarnation. In fact, the Chinese government is the one that has been systematically destroying Tibetan religion, culture, trying to erase the memory, especially among the youth. Today, China is giving Chinese language education among the Tibetan children. Even at the age of 4 and above, they have been forcibly sent into these colonial boarding schools, where we fear that Tibetan children in the next 5 to 10 years, they may grow up knowing and speaking only Chinese. These are genuine concerns of the Tibetan people, and therefore we completely reject whatever the Chinese government have been saying. In fact, they've been saying only out of their own insecurity, but we believe that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the entire legacy, not only lives and will continue. And as I speak, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is 90, he's healthy, hearty, and he continues to engage with almost about 400 people every single day, having that kind of a conversation. He's doing well. So this is the latest from Dharamshala.
In 1950, China began asserting control over Tibet by sending thousands of troops into the region. This culminated in a failed Tibetan uprising in 1959, after which the 14th Dalai Lama fled to India and established a government in exile. Although he later stepped down from political leadership, he remains a powerful symbol of resistance to Chinese rule. The Dalai Lama has previously stated that his next reincarnation may occur outside Tibet, a declaration that has drawn a sharp criticism from Beijing. China accuses him of using religion to promote separatism and has sought to regulate the succession process. In 2007, it issued State Religious Affairs Order No. 5, requiring all Tibetan reincarnations to be approved by the Chinese government. This move is widely seen as an attempt to control the selection of the next Dalai Lama and assert dominance over Tibetan religious affairs. Human rights organizations have condemned this interference, viewing it as a violation of religious freedom and an effort to suppress Tibetan the Chinese Communist Party launched a military campaign to assert control over Tibet, leading to the signing of the controversial 17-point agreement in 1951. Although the agreement was intended to ensure peaceful integration, Beijing soon disregarded its terms and began suppressing dissent. In 1954, the 14th Dalai Lama traveled to Beijing and met with the top Chinese leaders, including Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, in an effort to maintain dialogue. However, tensions escalated, and by 1959, a full-scale uprising erupted in Lhasa. Fearing for his safety, the Dalai Lama fled to India at the age of 24 and sought asylum from Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. He was followed by nearly 80,000 Tibetan refugees. Today, around 1 lakh Tibetans reside in Dharamshala, Himachal Pradesh, where the Dalai Lama leads the Tibetan government in exile. His presence remains a point of contention between India and China, with Beijing viewing him as a separatist figure. The struggle for Tibetan autonomy continues, and the responsibility to carry forward this movement now rests with the Dalai Lama's successor, whose selection has become a focal point of global attention and geopolitical tension.
It is with profound joy that we announce His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama's firm assurance of good health and his intention to live beyond 113 years. And as per the prayers and wishes of the Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet, the Buddhist communities and his followers all across the world, he has graciously gave his acceptance to continue his legacy through the reincarnation system, which means the 15th Dalai Lama will continue his legacy. Furthermore, he has unequivocally stated that the authority to recognize his reincarnation solely rests with the Dalai Lama institution, sending a clear and concrete message against the Chinese Communist government. They have no religious or legal authority to interfere in this very sacred Tibetan Buddhist practice. And the Chinese regime time again and again levels baseless allegations against His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a separatist, as a monk in wolf's robes. But ironically, they are seeking to manipulate his reincarnation, and they are trying to recognize another Dalai Lama for their political purpose. Therefore, it is time for the international community to expose the Chinese ill intention behind the interferences in these very Tibetan sacred traditional practices, and the one that will be revered and respected by the Tibetans and his followers all around the world will be the one that will be recognized by his institution. And Tibetans inside Tibet, their lifelong wish is to see His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama return back to a free Tibet. And the Tibetan prisoners inside Tibet, and the very reason, the very purpose of choosing to live instead of committing suicide is to have their very hope of seeing His Holiness back to a free Tibet. So it is the right time for the Chinese communist government to reach out to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and resolve Tibet issue in this very lifetime of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama.
The dispute over the Dalai Lama's succession has escalated, appointed between India and China. India has taken a clear position, asserting that no external power has the right to influence the selection of the Tibetan spiritual leader's successor. This authority, India maintains, lies solely with the Dalai Lama and the Garden Podragan Trust. In response, China reiterated its claim that it holds the historical right to approve the reincarnation, citing imperial era precedents and warning India against meddling in what is considered its eternal affairs. Despite India's firm stance rooted in religious freedom and respect for Tibetan autonomy, China continues to push its narrative, drawing criticism for its rigid and politically motivated approach. The disagreement has further strained bilateral relations, turning the Dalai Lama's successions into the flashpoint in the broader geopolitical contest between the two nations.
The issue of the Dalai Lama's succession has once again sparked a diplomatic exchange between India and China. Indian Union Minister Kiran Rijiju recently stated that the authority to select the 15th Dalai Lama rests solely with the current Dalai Lama and the Garden Podragan Trust, which he established. He emphasized that no external entity has the right to interfere in the sacred process. In response, China issued a strong statement warning India against using the Tibet issue to interfere in its internal affairs and potentially harm bilateral relations. The Chinese Foreign Ministry reiterated its claims that the right to approve the Dalai Lama's successor is a historical legacy that belongs to Beijing. This renewed disagreement has added further tension to the already sensitive matter of Tibetan spiritual leadership, making the selection of the next Dalai Lama a contentious and geopolitically significant issue. Between India and China continue to rise. India's policy on Tibet has undergone a subtle shift. The Dalai Lama's active engagement with the Indian government has drawn criticism from Beijing, which has long asserted its claims over the selection of the next Dalai Lama. China treats Tibet as an autonomous province under the name Xinjiang and has imposed strict controls over Buddhist monasteries and monks, enforcing rigid regulations to maintain religious authority. In this climate, India must tread carefully in supporting the Dalai Lama's succession process, while India upholds religious freedom and has hosted the Tibetan spiritual leader since 1959. Any overt endorsement of his successor could further strain diplomatic ties. Nevertheless, the issue has become a diplomatic test for India, balancing its commitment to spiritual autonomy with the complexities of regional geopolitics.
That's all about Big Story. Keep watching for more updates. CVR English.